All right, welcome back, guys. We're going to finish today chapters 18 through 21. Today was no Today there was no day or night that passed. Start again. There was no day or night that passed when I didn't listen for sounds from the cay. Both my sense of touch and my sense of hearing were beginning to make up for my lack of sight. I separated the sounds and each became different. I grew to know the different cries of the birds that flew by the cay, even though I had no idea what any of them were. I made my own names for them according to the sounds of their cries. Only the occasional bleat of the gull gave me a picture of that bird, for I had heard and seen them many times around the seawall in Williamstead. I knew how the breeze sounded when it crossed the sea grape. It fluttered the small leaves. When it went through the palm fronds the storm had not ripped away, it made a flapping noise. I knew the rustle of the lizards. Some were still on the island after the storm. I could only guess that they'd somehow climbed high into the palms. Otherwise, how could they have lived with water lapping over the entire cay? I even knew when Stu Cat was approaching. His soft paws on a dried leaf only made a tiny crackle, but I heard it. One mid-morning in early August, I was on the hill near the camp when I heard the far-off drone of a plane. It was upwind from me, but the sound was very clear. I reached down to feel Stu Cat. He had heard it too, his body tense, his head pointed toward the sound. I dropped to my knees by the fire, feeling around the edges until I grasped the end of a stick. I drew it back. Timothy had taught me to lay the fire sticks like a wheel, so that the fire burned slowly in the center, but always had a few unburned ends on the outside. I tended the fire half a dozen times each day. I spit on the stick and until I heard a sizzle. Then I knew there was enough fire or charring on it to light off the base of the dried palm fronds beneath the signal fire. I listened again for the drone of the plane. Yes, it was still there, but even closer now. I ran down the hill, straight to the signal fire, felt around the palm fronds, and then pushed the stick over them. I blew on it until I heard the crackle of flames. In a few minutes, the signal fire was roaring, and I ran to South Beach, where I would be able to hear the aircraft without hearing the crackling fire. Standing on South Beach, I listened. The plane was coming closer. I yelled toward the sky, "Here, here, down here!" I decided to run back to East Beach to stand near the fire and the new arrangement of rocks that spelled out help. Thinking any moment the plane would dive and I would hear the roar of its engines across the cay at low altitude, I stood with Stu Cat a few feet from the sloshing surf. I waited and waited, but there was no thundering sound from the sky. I could hear nothing but the crackling of the fire and the washing sound of the surf. I ran back to South Beach, where I stood very still and listened. The plane had gone. Slowly I returned to East Beach and sat down in the sea grape shade. I put my head down in my arms and sobbed, feeling no shame for what I was doing. There seemed to be no hope of ever leaving the cay, yet I knew I could not always live this way. One day I would become ill, or another storm would rage against the island. I could never survive alone. There had been many bad and lonely days and nights, but none as bad as this one. Stu Cat came up, purring and rubbing along my legs. I held him a long time, wondering why the aircraft had not come down when the pilots had seen the smoke. At last I thought perhaps that they hadn't seen the smoke. I knew it was going up in the sky, but was it white smoke that might be lost in the white blue sky? Or was it dark and oily smoke that would make a smudge against the blueness? There was no way to tell. If only there was some oily boards, the kind that had drifted around the waters of the Shawtagat. But I knew that the wood floating up in the beach consisted mostly of branches or stumps that had been in the water for weeks or months. There was nothing in them to make dark smoke. I began to think of all the things on the island. Green palm fronds might send off dark smoke, but until they were dried, they were too tough to tear off of the trees. The vines on North Beach might make dark smoke, but the leaves on them were very small. The sea grape! I snapped some off, feeling it between my fingers. Yes, there was oil in it. I got up, went over to the fire, tossing a piece of it in. In a moment I heard it popping the way that hot grease pops when it is dropped into water. I knew how to do it now. The smoke would rise from the cay in a fat black column to lead planes up the Devil's Mouth. If I heard another aircraft, I'd start the fire and then throw bundles of sea grape into it until I was certain a strong signal was going up from the island. Timothy hadn't thought about black smoke. I was sure of it. That was it. Feeling better now, I walked back up the hill to gather the few palm fronds that were left for a new fire base. I woke up at dawn of the morning of August 20th, 1942, to hear thunder and wondered when the first drops of rain would spatter on the roof of the shelter. I heard Stu Cat down near my feet let off a low growl. I said, "It's only thunder, Stu Cat. We need the water." But as I continued to listen, it did not seem to be thunder. It was a heavy sound, hard and sharp, not rolling, more like an explosion, or a series of explosions. It felt as if the cave were shaking. I got up from the mat, moving out from under the shelter. The air did not feel like rain. It was dry, and there was heavy heat. "They're explosions, Stu," I said. "Very near us. Maybe destroyers," I thought. I could not hear any aircraft engines. Maybe destroyers were fighting it out with enemy submarines. And those heavy, hard, sharp sounds could be the depth charges that my father had said were used by Navy to sink the U-boats. This time I didn't bother to take a piece of firewood down to East Beach. I dug into the tin box for the cellophane wrapped package of big wooden matches. 4 were left. I ran down the hill. At the signal fire, I searched around for a rock. Finding one, I knelt down by the fire and struck a match against it. Nothing happened. I felt the head of the match. The sulfur had rubbed off. I struck another match. It made a small popping noise and then went out. I had 2 more matches left, and for a moment I didn't know whether to use them or run back up the hill to the campfire. I stopped to listen, feeling sweat trickle down my face. The explosions were still thundering across the sea. Then I heard the drone of an aircraft. I took a deep breath, struck the next to last match, and heard it flare, and ran my hand over the top of it. There was heat. It was burning. I reached deep into the fire pile, holding the match there until it began to burn the tips of my fingers. The fire caught and in a moment was roaring. I ran down the beach to begin pulling Seagrape down. I carried the first bundle to the fire and threw it on. Soon I could smell burning. It began to pop and crackle as the flames got to the natural oils in the branches. By this time, I had carried 10 or 15 bundles of Seagrape to the fire, tumbling them in. I was sure that a column of black smoke was rising into the sky over the quay. Suddenly, a deafening roar swept over my head. I knew it was an aircraft crossing the quay, not much higher than the tops of the palm trees. I could feel the wind from it. Forgetting for a moment, I yelled, "Timothy, they've come for us!" The aircraft seemed to be making a sharp turn. It roared across the quay again, seeming even lower this time, because the rush of wind from it was hot. I could smell exhaust fumes. "I'm down here, and waved my arms. The plane made another tight circle, coming back almost directly over me. Its engine was screaming. I shouted to Stu Cat, "We'll be rescued!" But I think that he had gone to hide in the Seagrape. This time, however, the aircraft did not circle back. It did not make another low pass over the island. I heard the sound of the airplane going away, and soon it had vanished completely. Then I realized that the explosions had stopped too. A familiar silence settled over the quay. All the strength went out of my body. It was the first real chance of rescue, and maybe there would not be another. The pilot had flown away, perhaps thinking I was just another native fisherman waving at an aircraft. I knew the color of my skin was very dark now. Worse, I knew that the smoke might have blotted out the lines of rocks that spelled HELP. Feeling very ill, I climbed the slope again, throwing myself down on the mat in the hut. I didn't cry. There was no use doing that. I just wanted to die. After a while, I looked over toward Timothy's grave, and I said, "Why didn't you take me with you?" Chapter 19. It was about noon when I heard the bell. It sounded like bells that I'd heard in St. Anna Bay in the Shawnigan. Small boats and tugboats used them to tell the engineer. That was Mrs. Cole on the phone. I had to talk to her. Right, back to our book. Small boats and tugboats used the bell for the engineer to go slow or fast or put the engines in reverse. For a moment, I thought that I was dreaming. Then I heard the bell ring again, and with it the slow chugging of an engine, and I heard voices. They were coming from East Beach. I ran down. Yes, a small boat had come into the Devil's Mouth and seemed to be approaching our quay. I yelled, "I'm here, I'm here." There was a shout from across the water, and a man's voice said, "We see you." I stood there on East Beach, Stu Cat by my feet, looking in the direction of the sounds. I heard the bell again. Then the engine went into reverse, the propeller went thrashing, and someone yelled, "Jump, Scotty! The water is shallow!" The voice seemed to be American, I was certain. The engine was now idling, and someone was coming toward me. I could hear him paddling across the sand. I said, "Hello." There was no answer from the man. I suppose he was just staring at me. Then he yelled to someone on the boat, "My Lord, it's a boy and a cat." The person on the boat yelled, "Anyone else?" I called out, "No, it's just us." I began to move toward the man on the beach. He gasped, "Are you blind?" I said, "Yes, sir." In a funny voice he asked, "Are you all right?" "I'm fine now. You're here," I said. He said, "Here, boy, let me help you." I said, "If you'll just carry Stu Cat, you can just lead me to the boat." After I had climbed aboard, I remembered Timothy's knife stuck in the palm tree. It was the only thing that I wanted off of the K. The sailor who had carried Stu Cat went up the hill to get it, while the other sailors asked me questions. When the first sailor came back from the hill, he said, "You wouldn't believe what's up there." I guess he was talking about our hut and the rain catchment. He should have seen the ones that Timothy built. I don't remember everything that happened in the next few hours, but very soon I was helped up the gangway of the destroyer. On the deck, I was asked so many questions all at once that one man barked, "Stop badgering him. Give him some food, some medical care, and get him into a bunk to get some rest." A voice answered meekly, "Yes, sir, Captain." Down in the sick bay, the captain asked, "What's your name, son?" "Philip Enright. My father lives in Williamstead. He works for Royal Dutch Shell," I answered. The captain told someone to get a priority radio message off to the naval commander at Williamstead, and then asked, "How did you get on this little island?" "Timothy and I had drifted onto it after the Hato was sunk." "Where's Timothy?" he asked. I told the captain about Timothy and what had happened to us. I'm not sure the captain believed any of it because he said quietly, "Get some sleep, son. The Hato sunk way back in April." I said, "Yes, sir, that's right." And then a doctor came in to check me over. That night, after the ship had been in communication with Williamstead, the captain visited me again to tell me that his destroyer had been hunting a German submarine when a plane had spotted my black smoke and radioed back to the ship. There was still disbelief in his voice. When he had checked all of the charts and the publications on the bridge, he said that our K was so small that the charts would not even dignify it with a name. But Timothy had been right. It was tucked back up in the devil's mouth. The next morning we docked at the naval base in Cristobal, Panama, and I was rushed to the hospital, although I really didn't think it was necessary. I was strong and healthy, and the doctor on the destroyer had even said so. My mother and father were flown in from Williamstead on a special plane. It was minutes before they could even say anything. They just held me, and I knew that my mother was crying. She kept saying, "Philip, I'm so sorry. I'm so, so sorry." The Navy had notified them that I was blind so that it would not be a shock, and I knew that I looked different. They'd brought a barber in to cut my hair, which had grown quite long. We talked for a long time, Stu Cat on my bed, and I tried to tell them all about Timothy and the K, and it was very difficult. They listened, of course, but I had the feeling that neither of them really understood what had happened on our K. 4 months later, in a hospital in New York, after many x-rays and tests, I had the first of 3 operations. The piece of timber that had hit me the night that the Hato went down had damaged some nerves in my brain. But after the 3rd operation, when the bandages came off, I could see again. I would always have to wear glasses, but I could see. That was the important thing. In early April, I returned to Williamstead with my mother, and we took up life where it had been left off the previous April. After I'd been officially reported lost at sea, she had gone back to Curacao to be with my father. She had changed in many ways. She had no thoughts of leaving the island now. I saw Heinrich von Boven occasionally, but it wasn't the same as when we'd played the Dutch or the British. He seemed very young. So I spent a lot of time along St. Anna Bay at the Rudercade Market, talking to the Black people. I liked the sound of their voices. Some of them had even known Timothy from Charlotte Emile. I felt close to them. At war's end, we moved away from Charlot and Curacao. My father's work had finished there. Since then, I've spent many hours looking at charts of the Caribbean Sea. I have found Rondecor, Rosalind, Quinto Sueño, and Serenilla banks. I found Beacon City and North Cay and the islands of Providencia and St. Andres. I've also found the Devil's Mouth. Someday I'll charter a schooner out of Panama and explore the Devil's Mouth. I hope to find that lonely little island where Timothy is buried. Maybe I won't know it by sight, but when I go ashore and I close my eyes, I will know that this was our own Cay. I will walk along East Beach and point out the reef. I'll go up the hill to the rows of palm trees and stand by Timothy's grave, and I will say, "Dis be dat outrageous Cay." Eh, Timothy? And that is the end of the Cay. Now, if you like this book, there is a prequel/sequel. It is a book called Timothy of the Cay. It is by Theodore Taylor, and our library has it. It will go back in time. It'll kind of flash back to when Timothy was a young man, and then it'll flash forward to when Philip actually goes to visit the island. It'll kind of go back and forward in time. So if you like this book and you would like to read a little bit more, Theodore Taylor is one of my favorite authors. The next book is a prequel and a sequel. It is called Timothy of the Cay. I hope you enjoyed this one. All right. Love you guys. We'll be in touch.